Well, Marty had asked me to present on this Anything APP. Uh, my intention is to
Can you
also
start?
do a presentation.
You start recording, Marty.
It is recording.
Mine says.
I
Yeah,
think
yes, I'm
Oh,
recording.
I see. Right.
my,
It
my
says the session
dashboard
is being
says
recorded, and then it says I can push a button to start recording. It's cute. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
it's okay. Uh, I plan on presenting at the conference in New Orleans too, and I have a lot of research to do because this is an area, a subject area that has always intrigued me, and I always thought that it needs a lot more attention, and that is obviously the target pool that we use in associative remote viewing. And as obviously we were just speaking, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's an ongoing project. And so what I've done here is rather quickly put this together over the last few hours, which is kind of issues and subjects that I hope to address in more depth and with more data. But as I mentioned, I think everyone agrees that this is a critical area, and that's an area that needs to be improved upon and discussed in order that we can improve our hit rates and our successes and obviously learn a lot more, because it's a very integral part of the protocol. One thing that I've always understood, and I know we haven't addressed it too much, and it's kind of ironic in some ways, because I think initially we think of ARV as a binary, well, it is a binary process. We're trying to simplify it, at least in terms of that sense. And because it's binary in its outcome, or in our goal, we think it's simple. But in reality, in comparison to CRV, which is very, let's say, more detailed, target specific, we have two targets that are associated to the probability aspect. And as I said, most of the time we think that's easier, but in reality, it is more challenging. It is far more challenging, because not only of trying to find targets that are appealing based on the criteria that the research is suggesting, but I think the real challenge is in the pairing of the targets. So I'm going to just go over some of the concepts. I didn't know who was attending here today, but obviously this will be recorded. So for the benefit of some people who are relatively new to some of the terms, I'm just going to go over them a little bit. So let's see what we know. One of the concepts that comes up a lot is the concept of entropy, and not in the thermodynamic sense, or the physical sense, but in the sense of information transfer, and in the sense that we're talking about it for remote viewing. It is a measure of disorder, an energetic change and movement toward disarrangement or disorganization. So one of the images I like to use and have in my own mind is the concept of mingling or pouring cream or milk into a cup of coffee, and that represents entropy, because it's a movement towards disorganization and disarrangement between the system. I'm using a term here. I don't know if it's accepted, but I'm throwing it out there. And that is the term explicit entropy. Obviously, you have on this photo here on the left side, you have a physical commingling of elements, and obviously they are becoming a higher degree of entropy, meaning that there's a disorder and disarrangement. On a more natural image here on the right, we have a geyser, which is going through its active stage, and this too is a form of entropy. What I wanted to bring up, and I'm curious to get some responses from some people, is the next slide, which I'm identifying as implicit entropy. This is you would think that this is an image that would be described and sketched by viewers as metallic, or images of war, or having a land-water interface, or some kind of dynamic movement. Uh, Stephen Schwartz uses this, and this was a highly successful image that was used in tests that were done a few decades ago. I think it was 23 out of 27 times this image came up out of a pool of, I think, 700, where it was at first place. And what's interesting about this is that the viewers were not identifying what we're looking at on the face value. They were identifying the nature of this vessel because it is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise. And what was coming up were descriptions like sun inside a box, energy, this whole gestalt and concept of massive energetic flow. And I think that's very interesting. I think that's very interesting because in the discussion of entropy, it's suggesting there are two types. There's the physical observable type, as we saw in the previous photograph here, which may have implicit values too, but also this implicit. So that's something I did want to discuss. Feel free to
let me
ask questions.
This issue of entropy, entropy is something that you can measure sort of like temperature, and I think we have to become clearer on the entropy versus change in entropy. And so I think it's not the absolute magnitude, but it's kind of like the change in entropy that matters. Like when
You're referring to Shannon entropy?
In the concept here that we're talking about, like when Joe talks about always being able to get nuclear explosions, that's because there is an enormous change in entropy from before the explosion goes off to afterwards. And there's also enormous changes in entropy when you cross over, say, from the fireball, the hot fireball to the ambient air.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be what you have here in a way it's this gradient, this big heavy thing. And the fact that they pick up the nuclear inside is rather remarkable, but inside the container is all of this very, very hot, highly energetic stuff. And so it may be the gradient in entropy. Again, it's not really temperature, but you can think of it as temperature. It might be gradients in temperature that matter, just like the gradients of the color that Ed May, right, he's talking about the gradients in the pixel that you don't want to have.
Right. Okay, so I was going to identify that too, because there is a correlation, as Ed May points out, in the pixel gradient. So,
and I think that's when you talk about entropy in absolute values, I think it's almost always gradient of entropy. So just think that way when you talk about this again. Like
okay.
Even your milk example, you started out with sort of stable milk and stable water, and you're pouring them together, and now it's this dynamic mixing that eventually is going to bring it to a uniform state, which will have a higher entropy than what was started,
Okay.
but it's the gradient that matters, and the changes. In that case, it's time changes, but usually we're talking.
Well, I have a question with how is this being experienced? Is it being experienced as a visual image, or is it being experienced as something implicit? That's one thing I'm trying to address here.
I don't think any of us know, but I think consciousness is aware of the gradient. Someone pointed out a long time ago, if you look at the way your normal consciousness works, as soon as there's motion someplace, that's a change in your visual field, boy, you'll pick that up. Your consciousness will pick that up. So I
Right.
think
I think.
that's why it's all about gradients, and I don't know quite what the word implicit means. I think what you're really looking for is just the concept of gradient, but there could be gradients in time and there could be gradients in space.
Okay. Well, I'm using implicit in a non-material sense. Maybe that's
Well, I don't know
not the
what,
right word.
well, it's like, do you mean like something is implicitly very hot? I don't know
Well,
quite what you mean by
not obvious to the image, not
hot,
obvious within the image.
not obvious. Okay, well, the
All right.
gradients and
Here,
entropy,
here you can experience that, and on a metaphysical level with the geyser that may transmit to the viewer in ways we really don't know. But I'm saying, but there is a physical experience of visually understanding it, some kind of visual cognition here.
it's a dynamic thing that your consciousness appreciates even though it's a static picture. Absolutely. But you're saying
Okay.
the ship is different because there was a nuclear reactor sort of inside and some people picked it up and that's
Well, yeah,
implicit.
that was what viewers were detecting and decoding was the, imagery, and that was consistent with nuclear energy, and
Which is,
that's not visible.
in fact, if I were to look
That's,
at that, I wouldn't know that that's got a nuclear reactor inside. And I
well,
know a lot about nuclear stuff. I just wouldn't
right,
even think
but
about it.
neither did the viewers who were coming up with those
Right.
descriptors.
Okay, I understand the word
Okay.
implicit there, and
Maybe,
there maybe
maybe,
it works
well,
because there's the gradient inside and consciousness picks it up. So that's
right,
okay.
okay, and maybe the next slide, because I have some definitions of the Shannon entropy,
Hmm.
which I think this is along the lines of what you were saying, in that it represents the amount of information lacking prior to learning the outcome of an event, or this period of transition and change,
I
a
don't know.
measure of the uncertainty or lack of information about a system. And this is also translating into, more or less, into information theory, experiencing the target as a vehicle of information.
I don't, yeah, these
You're
are
not
hard to
following me?
understand. I don't understand
Okay.
her. I don't
All
understand the
right.
first one. Represents the amount of information lacking. This is what Shannon, I wouldn't say that's Shannon entropy.
No?
Did Ed May use those words or something? I mean,
I
entropy,
believe, go ahead.
Shannon entropy is really the same as entropy. It's just put in the form of information theory, but it is,
Right, with the ability to quantify it, to measure it.
that's what he did. Um,
Right.
I mean, Shannon entropy is separate from what Ed May did. It's got its own information theory. This is all very technical stuff, and I actually don't think you want to get into the technical of it too
No,
much
I
because
wanted to.
nobody,
No, I realize that, and I apologize because I'm researching this on the same level. I did want to address the terminology, some
right,
of the three basic terminologies, in
right,
light of all of this is in light of target selection and
right.
editing the target
Okay, but
pool.
I don't know what you
So,
mean by lacking prior to learning.
well, lacking meaning that the what's lacking is a measure of the probabilities.
And that
Okay, I'm
has,
not
I
going
don't
to
know
get
what
too
that has to
technical.
do with Shannon entropy, though, or lack of
No.
information about a system. It is devoid of meaning, and there is no a measure of an event's probability. Yeah, again, I think it's the gradients that matter. It's not like a picture will have. Uh, we ought to talk
Scott,
about this on the
Scott,
side.
all right. We don't have to get too technical, and I apologize. I don't want to get too technical. And
Yeah.
I don't think it really is. Let me move on then here. Uh, I'll go
Yeah,
through
there
my
you
slides. Calculating changes in entropy.
go.
This is what you
Right,
were talking about, entropic
right.
gradient, a quantitative measure of how entropy is changing spatially. Okay, and what Ed May was doing or is stating is that there is a correlation between, again, the physical gradients within the photo. In other words, the pixel gradient, the pixel transitions. So where there were intense changes within a target image, there were greater successes. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. This is a gem plot here. What you have right
Mm-hmm.
here is right on, in my opinion. And I think you can use this to, in the targeting sense, to go much further. Yes, there are changes in entropy, and that's very important. And Ed May has a paper out demonstrating that. But
Mm-hmm.
but guess what? Changes in dynamics, like your geyser, would be good. Part of the
Mm-hmm.
picture is static, part of the picture is dynamic. This whole
Mm-hmm.
idea that consciousness likes change, and that's what it picks up, is a major theme. And it works in entropy, but it works in other areas too.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree. Detecting change is key.
Right.
Okay. Another concept with regards to uh, characteristics of targets that is discussed with many of the great researchers in the area is numinosity, or element of the numinous, and that I'm defining as intentioned awareness, emotional impact, a sense of spiritual, transcendent, again, movement, uniqueness, and cohesiveness with the viewer. What we're looking, this would be considered a numinous photo because it's not just a bunch of squares and water and or a monument. It is a World Trade Center memorial, and for that reason, it will have a high degree of numinosity.
Okay. I hope you don't mind my
No, I want you
this
to.
time. Okay. I looked up numinosity once. Couldn't, it's not one of your best words, but this would not be the definition. In fact, in some ways, I think if you give a definition, the definition, your second bullet is basically its definition. Um,
So you're
uh,
agreeing with the second.
well, that's the definition of numinosity.
Mm-hmm.
Intention awareness is what Stephen Schwartz, um, he just talks about that, but
Mm-hmm.
and says you'll be able to pick up numinous things easier, and movement, uniqueness, and cohesiveness. I don't think that's part of the definition of numinosity. That's all I'm saying.
No.
I mean, you may
Well,
want to talk
I've
about
come.
these other
No,
things,
I'm
but
right. I've come across numerous definitions. I'll be quite honest
yeah, well, if you
with
could
that.
provide, okay,
I like,
No, no.
like
I'm not presenting anything here as factual. It's more
right,
concepts for discussion.
right,
yeah,
But
looking forward to hearing these broken down. And then there's words. I understood numinosity a little differently. Some people use, I know Lorraine uses a word like iconic. So if I give her the White House, she'll say, well, that's an iconic thing because it's a picture everybody's seen.
mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing. And then spiritual is good, but also numinosity to me means a lot of people have looked at it. It's
mm-hmm.
like it's a tourist site or it's a famous temple. So yeah, it has spiritual value.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a spiritual vortex because so many people have been quietly contemplative there. But yeah, to me, numinosity means a lot of people have seen it, and it's iconic, and it gathers energy because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those could be some of the other bullets that would go with it, and they might even be and/ors. I mean, it doesn't have to be spiritual. I agree. The Eiffel Tower is probably a numinous target.
Mm-hmm.
The White House. So they're sort of and/ors. Um, uh, yeah.
So
Okay.
famous is another category, another aspect
Hmm.
of luminosity, perhaps.
In fact, the picture of George Washington, I never thought about it, but you might say that's numinous for the reasons. See, it's the reasons that are the key here, not so much the word. But this focuses you on the fact that consciousness seems, and this is certainly what Stephen Schwartz says over and over again, more than he focuses on this one as opposed to the others. And I think they're all factors. But he focuses on the fact that consciousness does sort of build up in certain places for, various reasons.
And then just as
Hmm.
they want to balance the Shannon entropy, Lorraine complains about some of our targets. Not well, one would be highly numinous and one wouldn't, and that the numinous one would attract all the attention of the viewer. So it's something we want to measure in our pairings.
Yeah, that that is the challenge. That's really what the crux of the challenge is right there.
You said that before
Because I think
too,
we've all experienced that.
and I think that's a
What's
big
that?
part of the challenge, but just getting good targets is also, when a person sees a target, it'd be nice for him to go away. That was an interesting target. I think interest, and this is where the unique to each individual comes in. There are a lot of factors in what are considered good targets, and I think what you hope for is to get a lot of them. But one of them is just interesting. I once had somebody tell me, I just spent an hour and you just gave me a picture of a garden or something. They didn't like gardens, other people like gardens. Um, nature people as opposed to wanting more action, whatever. But you understand what I'm saying. There are just a lot of different factors in getting good targets, and then the pairing is a problem, is an issue, of course, as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you also mentioned it to me yesterday or the other day that uh, it may be beneficial for a group manager to harvest targets specific to the viewers, to have that intimacy with the viewer, and they could be very unique and different to that group. But we also run into the danger of being too selective, let's say, and narrowing a target pool to appeal to viewers, and then all of a sudden, in some indirect way, they're being front-loaded by certain criteria. So it's a delicate thing.
I
And the
think,
fact of the matter is, if we're going to try to excel, that we should be able to experience any target.
right.
I mean, ideally, that's really what we should do, and we shouldn't give into our idiosyncrasies and our whims too much. But at the same time, there's definitely there are characteristics that we need to address.
Yep, I agree. I agree totally. Otherwise, there is a kind of front loading. I mean, if you told everybody, God, we think numinosity is so important, or they would find this out, every target that they see is, something famous. Guess what? Pretty soon they're going to start guessing, okay, what's the next famous target? And so that's why you
Exactly.
really have to have a variety, and yet at the same time, they ought to have as many of these general features as we can find.
Right. Okay. Orthogonal. I'm defining that as having a visual difference and distinction, to be simple, uh, in terms of ARV targets. And here again, I say the challenge with ARV targets is to achieve this distinction while maintaining a balanced entropic value. So we don't want to have, and I think I've experienced it myself as a viewer, and on the other end as a manager, is that if there's not that balance of interest, or then there's a tendency for some, not all, for some viewers to gravitate towards what's interesting. Um, and that's basically what I'm pointing out here, which we just spoke about. Uh,
So yeah, there's a lot of ways. Yeah, you're going to go on in that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I didn't know you had more slides on orthogonal.
I have two more, so one more, a quote from Joe McMonagle at the end. But I don't know if these are orthogonal images. Subjectively, some people might think they are, and others may not. Others may find common denominators. We all have affinities for identifying certain things, and some of us despise certain images too that will lead us into the other target. So that was the point I was just trying to make here again.
This shows there is going to be a judgment. Okay, go ahead. John.
Last slide is a quote. I don't know if I wrote this down in speaking to Joe or pulled it out of one of his books, and he was very emphatic about it. A target should be overwhelmingly simple and have a great impact. A massive wave breaking on a shoreline, a geyser going off in Yellowstone. Simple, but a huge gestalt. And I tend to agree with the idea of simplicity on that. And what I was going to do next, Marty, but you didn't want me to display that for the reason of showing some of the targets. I was just going to go over the fact that you had put together a program, a spreadsheet to edit the target pool, and as I mentioned earlier, one of the projects that we're looking to do, and we're open to other people that are interested in participating. We don't want to get too many people, otherwise we may not get much done, but having a team of people that are going to come to consensus basically by re-examining the current target pool and eliminating those targets that there seems to be a consensus are not good for whatever reason. Marty, I didn't play around with the program, but is it possible to eliminate one of the targets and not the pair, or?
Yeah, I had to do that in one of mine because I like one of the targets, but the way I did it is I just did a copy and then just put it in as a pair.
Just replaced it, okay, because I haven't played
just
with that
replaced
yet.
one because they do have to go in as a pair, so I could code it that way, but for now, just make a copy of the one you want to keep in your machine, and then you get the other one, and then one of the programs, as you know, allows you to pick up a pair very nicely. So there are two separate programs. We have the 800 targets, and you can replace any one of them with another pair, and you can see now all 800 of them. So we can use that. I wanted to say one other thing about your orthogonal slide. You focus there on the entropy, but the fact of the matter is it's also true that they should be balanced in their numinosity. They should probably be balanced in their simplicity. You've raised, I think, all the key kind of components of a good target, and it may be it's okay to just have one component excelling, and those are the ones that then need to be balanced, or you might need to have a lot of them. I don't know. I find both of these targets interesting. I like this pairing, but whether other people would, I don't know. There's going to be a judgment, but you see by what you've laid out here, as the targeting team goes through, I think it will really guide them in finding the good targets and then making good pairings. Okay, yeah.
Any other questions or observations from anyone?
This is Deborah.
Hi, Deborah.
One element that doesn't tend to get discussed much, but that Courtney Brown really emphasized this in his book where he discussed issues of target pairs and sets, and he pointed out that the targets, if there's a difference in how easy the target is to view versus if it's difficult, So for example, if a viewer, he phrased it as if a viewer is working out a problem in a session, we all tend to like hit these points in our sessions where we're confused about something or we're not understanding or we're having some kind of struggle. And if the viewer at some point hits that, their consciousness may just be like, this is too hard, and they go over to the other one where it would be easy to get it. So for me, what that means is if it's something, if it's a photo that if I looked at right away and I knew what it was right away with my physical eyes, as opposed to, you know, sometimes there's photos you look at and even with your eyes open you're like, well, what is that? I can't really understand that. Then it may be that our consciousnesses go, or subconscious goes over to the one that just instantly we'd be able to recognize.
Yeah, I agree. I've experienced that myself. Sometimes with you know, one target image is an abstraction or is a very close up of let's say a plant or something, an exotic plant, and the other is more of a landscape.
In fact, I think
Or I've had difficulty identifying targets like you mentioned, though.
Go to Joe's. I think, didn't Joe almost say something like that? Didn't he use the word simple?
The quote?
Yeah, his quote. Overwhelmingly simple. So I think he also was thinking the same way, that you need to be able to recognize it so that you can describe it. And
I think
have
what he's
great
also talking
impact.
about is, I'm sorry, I think what he's also talking about is not having target images, photos that are busy, that have too much going on, that have, let's say, a life form with a structure in the back, and that, you know, it can't have too much of a story to it, because some will attract to certain elements of it. I mean, in CRV, yes, that's fine, but in ARV, the idea is to have a dominant gestalt.
Right, maybe one or two gestalts. Yeah, you know, you're getting advice from the guys that have been around even longer than we are. I think we have a good sense of this as well, and I think it agrees, and so now we're going to do it.
The problem I have, though, with this statement, the word simple has different meanings to different people, and some people, I'm sure, could interpret that as like simple would be a rock sitting on a ground, and that may just be so incredibly boring or way too simple. Some people might say a massive wave breaking on a shoreline is way more complex than many other things. So
this is where the judgment comes in, right? And I think the way you explained it is, and I think that is the meaning he had there, something that you would identify immediately. I think that's what you said. Maybe I think that's what he means here. And yes, the word is vague.
I tend to think that some of Joe's groups, his viewers work differently than ours. I know in Vegas he was complaining about really busy city scenes that basically had every type of shape in them, so that if your viewer wrote down a triangle, well, sure, that it has a triangle in it. So what? It's got every other shape possible. So those, he didn't like those type of things. But yeah, it's simple to some people is going to be boring to others and not attractive and hard to get a.
But then it won't have great impact. So.
But that's an interesting dynamic he has there. Simple but a huge gestalt. If it's got a huge gestalt, then there is that kind of guarantees it's not going to be boring. Because it implies, I don't know, it could still be boring, I guess, but it's going to have an identifying feature that people can latch on to.
Yeah. But, you know, Chris started thinking that and saying, and I hope it's true, that we should be able to find, you know, hundreds of good targets that we all feel comfortable match a bunch of these things. We'll see that, and then there's the pairing stage. So both of those have to go up. But they go up to judgment.
One thing you guys haven't talked about much, which was one of the hardest things that Mark and I tried to go through when we were picking targets, is that my viewers will complain that, well, I latched on to a triangle shape, and it was in both pictures, or both pictures pretty much have gray and white in them, and I wish the colors were different. Both pictures had, water and some kind of life form. One was a bridge and one was something a little like a bridge. So they're not complaining about the entropy being similar or even the gestalts being all that similar. It's, you want to be careful with certain shapes being in both pictures, which was really hard, even little hidden shapes. And because the viewers, I don't know, my teacher once said that his viewing mind was like a little child, and they'd have this fascinating bridge, but he would focus in on this one little rivet, which was different shape than you would normally see as a rivet, and that would fascinate him.
Doorknobbing.
Yeah, doorknobbing. So I know that when I'm picking targets now, I'm looking at differences in colors in the pair, and I'm looking at like hidden shapes. I'm looking at circles within circles. If they both have circles within circles, then I'm going to toss out that pair and try to find something that doesn't have the same gestalt in it in both. So there's colors and there's gestalts and there's man-made and natural and all these things that you don't want to be too similar in a pair. So I'll be looking for all that.
Yep. Yep, and that fits with exactly what Chris was saying, in that the pairing is a major challenge as well. And I've seen.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could simply identify zeros and ones?
But you see, the other thing we do have to realize is what you also said, Chris, is we're going to do the best we can. We have to realize there's nothing that's perfect for everybody, and the viewers also, we want to make it as easy as possible for as many viewers as possible, and the viewers ought to be getting better and better as time goes on as well. So colors, which a lot of people do get, Scott just said he's going to look for lots of different colors, but there's some people who are terrible at colors. And like geometry, I think geometry is a biggie. I think that's a very fundamental thing that consciousness picks up, are different geometries. And so making sure that there are dramatic geometries of different types possibly, in some of the target pairs. And again, you can't do it in all target pairs because guess what? You're going to be front-loading. All I have to do is decide if there's a square or a triangle or a circle. And you don't want the viewers to do that. So I think a good target pool has a mix, which some emphasize this, some emphasize that. And it's always going to be a challenge.
I agree.
However, we can definitely do better than what we have now, just because we've learned. That target pool was put together about 10 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
I think just by eliminating plates of food and things like that, it's a good,
Some people love food. We'll see it. I'm really interested in seeing how Scott's...
I get very angry with food plates.
Yeah. Other people may not.
I'm just kidding.
But you have to realize these went through. Russ Targ looked at every pair. I actually paid money for a guy who put together pairs that he thought were great pairs. They were done in a way at the time that seemed reasonable, and I think we've all gained experience and are listening and understanding what, Chris has talked about today better, and it's time to upgrade, and that's what we're doing. It's great.
And I think society's changed since Restar did that, and I think his experiments, most of them had a different goal than ours. And I also think most of the time he was more focused on CRV than binary.
No, we were doing ARV. We did this together. We had a group, Russ, myself, and I don't even remember who, but there were a couple of other people, and we looked at every pair and added new pairs. And yes, it was a different time, and there were different experiences there, but it was clearly for ARV. They were all
right, but most of his research that he's written about is probably more CRV related, and I can tell by the people with big CRV backgrounds that come into our group that they just think differently.
Well, and that's right.
And you need a different type of target for them.
The other thing to keep in mind is really there should be like people looking from a female perspective, because I am sure Russell Targ has a lot different taste than I do. If you walked into his house or my house, it would probably look quite different. So just as far as targets that are interesting,
Mm-hmm.
keeping that in mind. But we have a lot of female viewers.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. I didn't want to get too lengthy, but there's definitely a gender difference in detecting and decoding, whereas generally speaking, men are more spatial and more visual, whereas women definitely pick up more on aesthetic uh, elements.
And maybe
So
the
that's a whole,
emotional, right? Maybe
yeah.
the
Well,
emotional.
that's what I meant by aesthetic in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
sense,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
emotional.
yeah, yeah. So those kind of targets. Chris, you once, I think it was you who wrote this, said we definitely need a woman on the team, and I agree with that. Are you volunteering, Deborah?
Well, I have promised myself I won't volunteer for anything for a while. But that being said, it depends like what's involved. Like if people just got together for a meeting here or there and did it, we could maybe do that. But I have to be careful
Yeah, you're
about
busy.
Well, we could,
Yeah.
this is an ongoing project, really. There's no end to this. This is just evolving as we go. It's just tweaking things. So even if you avail yourself as a consultant, like you just did, that's great.
So
Just to get
Deborah,
some feedback.
how would you feel if we occasionally sent you a target pair and said, I want you to critique this?
Oh yeah, I could do that maybe.
And the other way, Deborah, you might very well come across a target. You say, we all do. I get a lot of my targets. I'm just on the internet, and then oops, I copy and put it in a potential target pool file. So that would be valuable if you would do that too. Again, and Patsy, you as well. Are you still with us? I can't tell. Yeah,
There she is.
maybe you want to volunteer.
Yes, I am.
Do you want to volunteer to be part of this target pool group?
Sure, I can do that. Yeah.
Okay, Chris, you got another one.
Great, great,
So
great.
when you call your meetings, you've got a nice group now.
That'll be good. Yeah, I'll just have to navigate, figure out how we're going to arrive at consensus. It's just to check each other's work or just be aware of what everyone else is doing. I think
And
that's
thinking, and then I think, right, judgments.
Yeah. I want to underscore something. You said something very interesting before, Scott, and I think you're referring to changes in time, and even just in the last 2 decades, the zeitgeist changes, and with that, the target pool is going to morph into aligning up with that more, where there's more resonance with people in general. So it's just an interesting thing that came to my mind.
Right. What everyone's observed about our current age is that we're pretty much forced to have a shorter attention span when it comes to looking at media. So before we could be fascinated by someone just doing a dance for an hour. And now, unless the scene is changing every 10 seconds or every 3 seconds in the music video, we just get bored and we say, this isn't art anymore, this is boring. So, and I think some of that applies to our targets. I know we want to be focused and the best remote viewers meditate and could focus on something for a while. At the same time, but what people consider exciting has changed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all sorts of stuff we could get into, but for our first project, it would just be good to focus on targets that we want that we can improve right away. And I wrote a whole paper on a zillion ways we could really be innovative and do interesting things. But for now, just eyeballing it and picking targets that meet this criteria we're talking about would be a good start.
And Wednesday we're
What was the
meeting.
title?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just asking. You said you've written a paper. What was the?
Yeah, I can send you the paper. It had to do
Yeah.
with being a dynamic image library.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, and maybe at the next. When are you having your next meeting, Chris? Wednesday.
Oh, I haven't decided that.
Oh no, I thought you had one.
So Scott, is Mark also interested, or
Mark is interested. He's very interested. Um,
in
I
being part of
mean,
the team?
yeah, he what he doesn't want to do is be the one that goes out and finds targets, because he said he agonizes too much over each pair. But just judging targets, whether they're good enough, he'd love to be on that committee.
Okay, yeah, I think maybe the first wave of doing what we're doing is just editing, maybe by elimination. We don't necessarily have to replace, because that could be more time consuming. So if it's possible within the program to just to keep a target that meets the criteria that we agree on, and to have a void spot and then fill it later, or someone else may fill it. Is that doable, the way it's set up?
You can replace just one image if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
keep one of the two pairs.
so we could eliminate by editing down, maybe as a first wave, and not concern ourselves with replacing at this time.
No, no,
Just
I don't
just
understand the
no.
difference. You're going to be replacing what?
Well, if there's a pair that's there and it's agreed that one of the images is
Oh
not
yeah, yeah. You
favorable,
can keep the one and then find what you think is a good match for the other just by
right,
copying the one you want to keep. Yeah, yeah.
right. But my point is, it doesn't need to be done immediately. So we can have pairs. Oh, but you want to. So that's the live pool. So you need to have an image in there. You can't have a void.
Oh no, no, you don't want to void. That's not a good.
Okay.
That's not a good pair.
Okay. I got you.
So you want
I
to
got you.
replace them, and one subset of replacing is keeping one image the same. But you
Okay.
want to replace.
I found my paper. If you want, you can hand me the screen, and it goes over a few interesting topics. Just
Do you want to do that now? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to leave at 1:30, though I don't have that much to discuss.
Do I have? Did you have
Uh,
anything you wanted to go over?
Yeah, let me hand
Marty?
it. I do, but this targeting is really even more important than what I'm talking about. So I'm happy to have Scott do this. Just give me like 15 minutes, Scott. Why don't you take 15 minutes and then give me 15 minutes, okay? And then you can go back to targeting. But this thing, I think Scott was planning, Chris, on having a meeting Wednesday. It sounded like at some point in time, I think we tentatively said that.
just part of our regular development meetings, and one of the, since we made the image library part of that
The
we
R
are,
meeting. You'll bring it up at the R meeting. Perfect. Chris, and
yeah.
you'll be there at the R meeting, which was...
Okay, Wednesdays. Yeah, we're keeping that time slot the same.
Yeah, very good, Scott. Okay.
I don't see how to take the screen.
Yeah, I'm not. This is a new dashboard. I'm up here. I'm sharing my screen.
Go to
Marty.
his name. I can do it, but I want you to learn how to do it. You see the little down thing? Click on his
Oh, okay.
name, and under there it says Make Presenter. In fact, you might be able to do
I
it
got it.
yourself, Scott.
All right, show my screen. So which screen do you see here? Do you see this?
Specialized
Yeah.
subsets.
All right, good.
Right, you've got it.
So at one point when Marty and I were looking at how we wanted to improve the library, Marty sent me an email and he says, what do you think about pre-pairing the groups, having a fixed set of pairs versus kind of dynamically mixing and matching, combining from different sets. So in the Mark White library, we had a category for animals, and then we would have a category for, I don't know, vehicles, say, and then we had 6 or 7 categories, and he would pick a picture from each category and then assume that those were orthogonal, assume that those were very different, just because the animal category should naturally be different than the vehicle category or the building category or whatever. and so at first I just discussed the pros and cons of that, and then I came up with some innovative stuff at the end. But if you don't mind, we'll just go over this real quick, because
Sure.
there were some interesting ideas here. So for pre-pairing, like we're using right now. But for a while we used the Mark White library. I think it was August through October, and we had some problems with it. And so for preparing the targets, one of the pros is it's simpler to build a library. Because if you were trying to make everything orthogonal with a million different combinations from 10 different categories, it would be really hard. Just makes everything really complex. But I guess it's in the pro section here. Yeah, so it's simpler to be preparing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's good in our case because we have a bunch of volunteers who aren't getting paid, and people only have so much time to dedicate improving the image library. And then there's just so many combinations. If you didn't do preparing and you had 10 different categories, then the complexity just explodes into the hundreds of thousands or millions of different combinations, especially if you're trying to make sure every single piece of every single target is orthogonal to every other piece of every other target. It just gets way too complicated. So the good thing about preparing is you can decide ahead of time if they're a good targeting pair, and if you're not preparing, then it's so complex it's almost impossible to weed out bad combinations of target pairs. And especially with Firefly, and we'd like the targets to work right away if we can, and not to have to go through too many revisions. Although inevitably there's going to be revisions. And then I started talking about some of the things I would like to do if I were building a library. I would assign each photo and each photo pair, but especially each photo, certain kind of metrics, like luminosity we were talking about, and what category it's in, if we have categories for like man-made versus natural, or just a different. We could do man-made versus natural. We could assign the Shannon entropy number to it, like you said. There's all sorts of measurements we could assign to each photo, and then we could try to balance those. And each photo also has a hit rate, so that's another kind of a dynamic metric for each photo. And I'll be coming up with the hit rates by Wednesday for our past photos. So that would be which photos caused that individual viewer to choose the right side or pass or miss. And then so presumably we would want to replace the photos that had low hit rates. And more than that, it's also a bad photo pair if it always causes passes. And hit rates doesn't normally include passes that much, so in a way it's more than the hit rate. And obviously we want photos that...
When you say hit rates, are you referring to cumulative scores on the CRs, or the number of times that image was successful?
The number of times the image was successful. So in the log file, it pretty much shows every regroup and most of the binary groups for the past couple of years. And I can see that an image was used 10 times, and that 60% of the time that viewer got it right. It caused him to choose the right direction. Even if the group got it wrong, that viewer got it right. But it would also be interesting to see if he at least got over 3.5. So that's what I mean by passes.
Yeah, I like that. Making a table which has the time that it was hit, the time it was missed, and the time it was passed. You're right, because there could be some that are, nobody can get.
Yeah, the passes are almost as bad as the misses.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then there's a couple types of missing too. I mean, if missing causes you to flip, if that one photo always caused a miss, then it's it means more than it's hard to connect to. It means it's somehow people are connecting to it and coming up with the wrong answer.
But yeah, maybe they're going like Deborah was saying, and you know, this Harold Bem was talking about. Some you just recoil against, and so you go to the other one, so you get a miss,
Right.
or something like that. Yeah.
So the disadvantages of pre-pairing, looking at the pros and cons, the disadvantages, we don't get as many photo pairs as if we randomly pick from different sets. So with Mark White's library, you theoretically had a lot of different pairs, target pairs to choose from, arguably much more than the 100 or so we have now. So that's an advantage. We actually, in a way, we get a bigger target pool with less work. Another cons for pre-pairing would be people might get bored. They might say, okay, this target always comes with this target, or people might figure it out faster or stop being effective. But I think we can make it dynamic, so that's not a problem. So here's the pros and cons of not preparing. In this case, you would have different categories of photos, and we would kind of dynamically pair it. And right at the time, after that person does a session, just throw together two targets from two different categories. So the advantages are we get more combinations with less photos. We could theoretically have 100,000 different combinations or whatever. People might be interested in the target longer because they don't see the same target pair together almost ever. The disadvantages are it's much more complicated to put together. The complexity grows exponentially. And then if we're trying, it would make it harder to add in these other things that we do want to add in, like entropy and specialized subsets. So if we're trying to balance the entropy, and we have just too many combinations of things that we can't even anticipate, then that would be really hard. We almost wouldn't be able to do it, not with our current level of participation. And then we couldn't do specialized subsets, which I talked about earlier down. So we wouldn't be able to be as innovative really if we were combining from different sets. With the pre-paired, we can be more innovative because we can see exactly what the user is going to get, and we can measure the two things like entropy and luminosity and major gestalts and certain shapes and color schemes and things like that. And there's a greater chance that we're going to get a bad photo because we're not really looking ahead of time on how these photos are paired. We're just kind of picking from two different categories. So it's much harder to tell if we're going to get a bad combination of photos. And everybody has their own definition of what a bad combination is, but my viewers complain if the colors are too similar or if the shapes are too similar. And it's really frustrating if you spend an hour on a session and you identified a circle within a circle and thought that was a pretty unique thing that should identify that photo uniquely, and then you find out both photo pairs both have circles within circles, and your major identifying feature doesn't help you choose at all between the two photos. So we want to avoid that. So my recommendation at the time to Marty was it may sound nice to get more combinations by randomizing the pairs, but that's really hard. Even with pre-pairing, we get bad combos, so adding the complexity of kind of combining things by randomizing increases the chances we're going to get bad combos. So assuming we can barely get it working with the pre-pairing, then combinations would just make it almost impossible to avoid bad combinations. So given our limitations for a first effort, I would recommend pre-pairing. So then I said later, with more experience and with a bigger team and more time to spend on it, it'd be interesting to randomizing it. But I personally have never seen that work. It would mean keeping track of so many variables and make it harder to do more interesting innovations, like Shannon entropy. So for innovations, I would focus on more interesting ways of keeping it fresh and relevant to the individual viewer. It could be dynamic and an ongoing process. We could swap in and out images at a regular rate, so the library is already always changing. People could submit new targets at any time, and we would collect them for the next new library or add them to the old library. People who grew to love the old library would have the option to stick with it. We could experiment with giving people the exact targets they had past success with. So later on, I call this the Hall of Fame approach. So everybody kind of has a Hall of Fame of targets that have produced their best sessions ever. These are the ones they want to put in plastic and put up on the wall. And my teacher makes all these composites. But they have a really good session he has. He'll bring it to class and he'll put it in plastic and he'll make a nice Photoshop thing where he puts both targets side by side and which words he uses. Or if the class comes up, if he has a target in an envelope and the class does a really good job of describing it, then he'll take the best parts of each individual's where we all kind of coalesced and how we identified that target well and put those all in a composite. So a Hall of Fame type approach.
Bring those targets into us too. Take pictures of them or something.
Yes, I will. Now that some of my old projects are getting completed, I might have time to do that. Mm-hmm. Now here's something I thought Marty could add right away to the comments section. So right now in the feedback page, people can make comments on how well they match the target. But it would be easy to have people vote right there on whether they thought it was a good target pair or not. And then, I mean, they already could comment in their comments, but that's harder to keep track of. If they actually had a radio button or something, or
yes,
they could assign or give a score for how good the target was, then that would be a nice quantitative way for us to weed out targets. Now, just because one person doesn't like it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to take it out for everybody, but if multiple viewers are telling us that it's not a good pair, then we would at least look at that pair and maybe swap it out.
Yeah,
and that is the concept of specialized subsets. So say, when Jennifer first came to me, she says, I specialize in colors. And I know myself, I like to focus in on motion. When there's motion in the target, I'm generally good at picking up that there's motion and also what direction that motion is in, even if that direction is circular or spiraling. So we could tag each image with all these characteristics, like whether it has motion or whether color would be a really important part of it, and we could make a library that measures both kinds of entropy, for example. So if entropy is important, then we could have a subset of pictures with lots of irrevocable change in it, assuming that's one way to describe entropy. And if some people are really good at that, I actually don't think everybody is really good at that. When I looked at that, I actually got that aircraft carrier target, and for me, picking up on nuclear stuff is not that important. That big triangle in the front of it is what really got me, and I did a clay with a big triangle in it, and so that dimensional aspect of it was more important to me than the nuclear stuff. But I do think that's a good target, and I don't know if it was me or some of my other viewers that picked up on the motion of the boat through the water, and they could tell the water was frothing. There was movement against the water. Those are the type of things that both me and my viewers have focused on with that target, the aircraft carrier moving through the water. I guess there's another one. It's another target just like that with two aircraft carriers. So there's an aircraft carrier and a boat, a battleship that kind of supports the aircraft carrier. And I made little clay airplanes, sitting on the top of the aircraft carrier. But it wasn't the nuclear stuff that I got. In any case, we could have subsets of the target library that specialize on entropy or specialize on motion. And here's the numinous thing we were talking about. If it's a picture of the Olympics or a picture of something that was really big in the news, something with cultural significance, you could assign a cultural significance index to it, right? Like the March on Selma, they just made a movie out of it. The president keeps mentioning it. It was in the Academy Awards. It's the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. Blah blah blah. So that a picture of that bridge with people on it has a high cultural significance index. Some that would say that would relate to numinosity. And there's a lot of historical emotions tied up in that one place. And when my psychic teacher first taught me remote viewing back in '93, she said that any psychic is going to be drawn to the most emotional thing that happened at that spot. So if you come across a spot in the woods and a murder happened there, then that's what you're going to key in on there, because there's a lot of emotion tied into that. And all sorts of things have happened on that bridge in Selma, but that was since there was violence and there was conflict and hope and all those things. That's another reason that target could attract attention. And here's the most interesting part that I want to get in later, but we could keep track of which indexes help individual viewers. So some viewers are going to be attracted to the entropy, some to the emotion, some to the colors, some to the emotion, things moving around in the picture. So I would definitely like to tag every image with different measurements for that image, and that wouldn't be hard for the new ones that we add. So ultimately, someday I'd like to have a self-correcting Hall of Fame type approach, where we have a library that assigns targets to viewers based on their past success with that specific target or that type of target. So you could have a Hall of Fame subset. So if we have 800 images, and this viewer has done 50 transcripts over the past 2 years, then we definitely have a set of targets that were successful for them. And if we're keeping an index of different aspects of each target, then we also have an idea of what type of targets work for them. So we could actually dynamically, when it comes time to generate a photo for them, after they've already uploaded the transcript, we could often, if not always, pick a target pair for them. That's a type of target that worked well for them in the past. And if there's someone like Joe with lots of experience, and just for some reason, even after his 40 years of experience, Joe McMonagle says I don't do well on waterfalls, or we saw him do not so well on a crop circle in Vegas, then we might want to say, this is important. We got $10 million riding on this one. Let's make sure he doesn't get crop circles or waterfalls. I would say that would be a logical approach. So we already have data on what targets work for each of our top viewers, and our library could include some Hall of Fame images from the old library. So we already have numbers, and I'm going to have those numbers by Wednesday on which images cause hits and which cause misses and passes. So at the very least, we could pick pairs that cause hits, and someday we could actually pick pairs that are more likely to work for that viewer.
Scott, can I interrupt you and get in
Sure.
10 minutes, and then you can go back and finish, okay?
Sure.
Because
that was it basically, but we might want to discuss it.
yeah. Well, I thought, yeah, very, very interesting stuff. Some of it definitely we want to do, but certainly not in the short term. You know, it takes too too many resources. But the idea is good. Okay. Let me find. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I only have a few, but let's talk about topic 2. And there are a lot to say about analysis judging, but for now, let me just focus on with the data. As you all know, I'm paying a lot of attention out to the data. We really are learning a lot about analysis judging from the perspective of being able to predict what's going to happen next. And one of the things, and we've actually known this for a while, is this 3.5, the fact that we put out that a CR, confidence ranking of 3.5 or more is critical for wagering. We get better results when that's around, when people feel, yes, you know, they've done reasonably well, they've made a psychic connection. And the confidence ranking between the pair it does much better when you're greater than 1. Okay. The other thing which we are learning, and it's hard psychologically to do, is that passing is not just okay, it's sort of more than okay. Too often I think we see people pushing it when they really should be passing, gee, I've invested this time, I'm part of the group, I want to give a prediction, and really they should pass. So that's one level of things. We are more and more putting our attention on this aspect of looking at the data, and that is, can we come up with variables which will help us predict the probability that the prediction we're currently working on. So I right now as a group manager have 5 people who have made predictions. How can I come up with the probability that that prediction is in fact accurate? Now, the approach is to focus down now at the viewer's level. We've done some work already on the group level. I've actually showed some of that, and that's valuable too, and that'll become part of the analysis. But why not be able to do that on the individual viewer's level as well? It's almost like a viewer style, however they're doing in they're self-judging. This analysis would work for independent judging as well, but right now I only have the data for in a form that I can use. But this idea of not just using a majority vote, each of the viewers, 2 say they go this way, 3 say they go that way, okay, let's go with the 3, which is basically what we tend to do, and you know what, that works okay, but hey, maybe we can do better. Especially, for example, consider the case where the 2 people versus the 3 happen to be exceptionally good viewers. Is there some way that you can take that into account? So this is kind of where I am with this right now. This concept of taking the difference of confidence rankings So that's the scale here. This is the difference of confidence rankings plotted against the cumulative hit rate, where this is ordered. So these are ordered by the difference. So in this case, there was a difference of 5, and you can see that happened to be a hit because this is the probability of greater than any given number here. These are all nice working plots. They're not intended to be pretty, but this is the confidence ranking data frame. That's where it comes from, and LZ is the variable. So notice the second one. Now this is actually the third one. There are two of them on top of each other here, because I can see that because this is at a 66% success rate, so we had 2 hits and 1 miss. But notice this plot has a nice pattern. So if someone comes along, okay, I didn't mean to put the person's name there, but it doesn't matter. Um, on the next prediction, so let's say this one here was the next prediction, I can get a specific probability now based on her past history on what that'll be. And if it's up here, I'm going to have even a higher probability. And if I do that for multiple viewers, so here's another viewer, okay, and let's say she also is in the same direction and high, that would really give me a way of coming up with, now the mathematics is not complicated, of coming up with the combined effect. But what if one goes one way and one goes the other? Well, I might normally pass, but say this one is down here and this one's up at a 90%. Well, maybe we want to go with the 90%er. And my next major step is to take this kind of information, and I have it also for another parameter. This is the measure of the difference in the CRs. This is 2 different viewers. And you should know that most of the viewers do not have nice patterns like this. There are various reasons for that, which I would like to understand better. I understand some of them. We won't go into those now. But you can see there's a lot of information here. The other one is something more like the Z of a normal distribution. I've talked about that one before. So, however, here I use a classic standard deviation of 2 rather than calculating it because for one person, lots of times there are situations where the numbers get really large. Anyway, I've calculated that too. But notice the same thing. We have some nice patterns forming here, which give me the ability, when I'm looking at this person's transcripts and their confidence rankings, because that's all that goes into this, is, if somebody is up here, I have a pretty good reason to maybe just go with that. Now, I may get supporting information, say there are only these 2 viewers, or not. But it isn't as simple as one going one way and one going the other. I can now look at the probabilities. And I see that as being potentially a major step forward. But we have a lot more to do and to learn. And my next step is to do what I call what if, which is looking at all the past data. Imagine if I had done this with the probabilities and gone in the direction that had a net, if these went in opposite directions, or by how much. There are lots of new variables you can bring in, and the computer is very good at doing what if once it's programmed properly. So that's where my focus is going, and I'm pretty excited about it. Seeing trends like this, it was not clear there would be trends like this. And seeing how long they're maintained, hopefully forever. You want the viewer to just keep doing whatever they're doing, because this is a real winner. But as I am now putting out to our group the fact that stuff like this is going on, they subconsciously know it anyway, I suspect. but they will have to consciously adapt to it, and I believe they will. Okay, so that was what I had to say. Any more comments, questions on this? Okay.
Of the two viewers you showed there, I know one of them passes a lot, which is good recommendation for other people to pass more. But how about the other one, T Maya? Does she pass often?
Well, I could look at this. Happens to be the non-pass. Well, no, all of these ignore the passes, but this also ignores the 3.5, which is interesting. I have one which includes the 3.5, but as you'd imagine, they're less data points. But this does, they both exclude the passes, and you can see she's got a fair number of data points here. Yeah, this is yours. Mine is up here.
So you can tell they have a lot of sub 3.5s.
Right, over here. So you can see those. Well, no, but these are differences now. So this could have been 3.5 versus 4.5. So you don't know that by looking at this plot. I have another plot that looks at the maximum. You know, I'm in the process of looking at so many variables and seeing what I think might be valuable. That's why I'm showing you this, because I think this might be valuable. These are the two key parameters now that look like they might be the most valuable that I'll do my what-if analysis on next. And see historically if the individual viewers and the groups with these viewers in them can do much better.
Yeah, this just makes so much sense and just such a natural progression that at some point, I mean, isn't that true in any field that eventually you look at the higher performing people and put them together and use those people when it really counts? It kind of doesn't make sense not to do that if you're, say particularly for like a project like Firefly or something. It just, at some point you have to do that, because otherwise there's going to just keep being in any group like this. There's going to be those people that are either beginners that keep coming in, or just the people that don't get past whatever issues that they have. And I think that a focus on this too, it serves to motivate other people. Like even I see this and I'm like, oh, I haven't really put a whole lot of effort into my viewings lately. You know what? If these people are doing good, what about maybe I should apply myself a little bit more? And I would think that would be also the case. This ongoing debate of can people get over displacement or not? Well, those that are doing consistently well with their hit rates, they serve as an example to everybody else. Yeah, yes, people can get over that, or do well in that area. Which is
Excellent,
very cool.
excellent, Deborah. Thank you. And you should know you must be psychic and precognitive, because this is going to be the next step with Firefly, is to bring these particular people and give them more weight and do that sort of thing. So, okay, I'm going to give it back to you, Scott, and then I have to go. And all of you have a great weekend.
Hopefully Hopefully we can stop the recording and it'll actually work.
Oh, didn't one of you guys? Well, when you disconnect from everybody, it stops automatically. Okay. And you guys have the ability to do that. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, take care. I will leave you now. And thank you, Chris. Great kickoff for the targeting team.
Thanks for the input and feedback.
Okay.